Hey, everybody. We're so excited to be back with Life on Purpose Live. Sorry, there's my lawn man is here. He'll be gone in a second. But we have Dr. Saundra Smith is with us. She is the author of Sacred Rest. She's actually the author of 3 books. She's an internist. She's been practicing medicine for over 20 years. She's been on lots of media shows. We're very excited to have her. She is a wife. She is a mother. She is in many of the struggles we have to manage time and productivity. And she can do so from a spiritual standpoint, also a medical standpoint. So we're going to jump in and talk about rest. Just the word makes us hungry. So let's talk about, we are filled in a season of unrest. I mean, we have pandemic, we have riots, we have protests, and we're all in a little bit of a panic with, what do we do? And so help us enter into that dialogue with ourselves and with others about to just be able to position ourselves that we're not freaking out, but we're trying to slow down long enough to rest.
Yeah, so I think that's the important thing, is really to get an understanding of where you're at. I think as a physician, I'm always trying to make sure people think about the process of self-diagnosing, and rest is no different. So a lot of us, we're at this point, we're saying we're tired and we're getting sleep. We haven't left our homes, many of us, so we're not physically necessarily tired. So it's important to think about what kind of tired are you? And in my research and in the work that I've done, I've developed and kind of seen 7 different types of rest that people tend to be deficient in. And I think during this season, it's even more important for people to be aware of what type of rest that they're really needing. Is it, just physical, or is it mental, spiritual, emotional, sensory, creative? There's so many different types of rest that saying I'm tired really isn't going to be very helpful.
Well, that's interesting, because we do kind of lump it all into, I'm tired, I just need rest. So what do you find is the worst problem with resting that we most of us are usually carrying around? What kind of tired are we most of the time?
Well, it depends, but right now, with everything that's happened with staying at home orders and all of this that's been going on, the 2 that I'm seeing the most common and most frequently are mental rest deficits, that people are having trouble with mental rest, and they're struggling with emotional rest. So with mental rest, if you're watching a lot of news and you're staying up to date on everything that's happening on social media, it can be difficult to turn off your thought processes and to get your head back to a quiet, peaceful place. And that can leave you feeling overly anxious and stressed unnecessarily because of that ongoing news and media input. And then the emotional rest right now, with everything that's going on with the riots and with the recent deaths, what a lot of people are experiencing is they're not sure how to express their emotions. They're not sure what's a safe place to be open and honest and to just be authentic about what they're feeling, for fear of backlash and being misunderstood. And there's so much going on with that. So I think it's important for people to realize when they are feeling restless in those areas, and then know how to correct it, how to get rest in those areas.
Well, and when you think about the emotional drain and the lack of rest we're feeling, because we are, how important is the spiritual aspects of, and I know you're a very strong Christian, the patience? I mean, is patience just something we learn, or is patience something we choose? Because that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think there is a choice process to it, because, to be impatient, I think all of us can automatically go there. By the time we were 2 years old, we had mastered impatience. So you have to choose that you are going to follow a discipline of patience. And I think it's difficult for some people to be patient because they're already so wired up. Patience requires a settled spirit and a settled mentality. And if you are chronically in an anxious or stressed state, your body's kind of functioning off the fight or flight response. That's not a patient response. That's a let's get it done, let's go right now. So it takes some effort to help yourself get back to that quiet and content mental, emotional, and physical state.
And how does all of that play in with our brain and the chemical makeup of our body? So if we're feeling anxious, that causes our reactions to be very different than if we're not feeling anxious, correct?
It does. And there are different chemicals that are released in the body. And so the way to kind of undo that, or to help your body release the chemicals that are more relaxing and allow you to get more to a stable state, is to be sure that you are allowing yourself those restorative type activities that undo some of the stress that you're experiencing. And I think that's the key for many people when they're thinking about rest. For many of us, when we think about rest, we automatically think of cessation of activity. We think about stopping. And really, that's not always rest. Rest really is about the restorative activities that help you pour back into those places of your life that are being drained, and spiritually to allow God to pour back into those places of your life that you're pouring out of.
Well, and that's a really great it leads me to a question about seeking God. So we are in a world of just confusion and chaos, and it's scary out there. So how do we seek God? I mean, in the rest and seeking Him, and just that slow, Lord, quiet time, peaceful place where we shut out the world and we seek Him. What does that look like in a world that is busy and does demand a lot?
Yes, I love that question. And it's one I spent a lot of time with in my book, Sacred Rest, because I wanted people to see how Jesus emulates all of these 7 types of rest, because I think he's our key example to see how to kind of live this out in a human form. I'll just give you some quick examples of that. I love when we start thinking about emotional rest. And many of us are in a situation where, particularly if you're in any kind of leadership type role, you may not feel open to just share authentically with everybody, to let everybody know if you're struggling or if you're depressed or if you're anxious. And I love that when we think about the life of Jesus, if you look at how he interacted with his kind of the masses, who he was ministering to and who he was in front of when he was with large crowds, then we see him draw away with the 12 and have kind of a different level of intimacy and relationship with them. And then we have examples like on the Mount of Transfiguration, where he kind of goes away with these 3. And it's here with these 3 that you see kind of what emotional rest looks like. At no point in Jesus's ministry was he ever inauthentic, was he ever trying to hide himself from people. But it was those 3 that got the fullness of who he was, as far as his full identity and everything that he encompassed. And I think it's important that when we look at our own relationships, that we have a similar pattern. Many of us, we deal with a big world, the masses. And then there should be a group of people that are like the 12, where we have closer relationships with, we feel free to express our feelings authentically. But then there should be a much smaller, tighter group where you can be truly honest. So if you're a minister, or if you're someone who's a leader of a company or whatever, or mom, and you're struggling right now, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're suicidal, whatever the situation may be, that there's a small group that you can just be fully transparent with, because that's how you stay emotionally healthy and get the emotional rest that you need.
Well, and that leads to, I know you've got some reference in your website and in your books about, there are a lot of people out there that are unhappy, that are in difficult relationships, that wish things were different. So I'm a big believer in being able to communicate those things with those that are in that tight group of people. But I think a lot of people are holding in emotions out of fear of how to come clean, how to be authentic, who to share with. How important is it to say a husband and wife are in a fight, to be able to talk about that? Because otherwise, if you don't, that becomes unrest, that becomes tension. And I think sometimes we fail to communicate effectively so that we can move forward, and therefore we're kind of stuck with a little tension. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think particularly with husbands and wife, there has to be an ability to have some level of emotional and social rest within that relationship for it to be healthy. A lot of statistics are showing that since the sheltering in place and all that's gone on with COVID, that a lot of marriages have struggled with that because they're being closer with their spouses than they have ever had to be.
4 hours a day.
Long periods of time, kids, a lot of relationships are feeling the pull of that. Mm-hmm. And with social rest specifically is the rest that we receive when we are around life-giving people. Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing is, when I say life-giving, it's the people that are positively pouring back into us. They're not requiring anything from us. They're not putting a strain on our relationship or needing anything from us. Well, the reality is our families usually are not those positive pouring back in people. Those are the people that are needing stuff from us. That's the nature of that relationship often. And so I think it's important for people to be aware that your social rest doesn't have to come from your spouse or your kids. Usually it won't. The people that are pouring back into you are oftentimes those adult friends. Usually those people that you put off because they're not needing anything, so they're not demanding anything from you. They just want to love on you and support you and be there for you. So I think it's important to put value back into adult relationships and see how important they are to be healthy and to have a healthy emotional support system.
Well, and I agree with that. And, I always tell my friends, girlfriends, I got to have girlfriends, but that's true for men too, is it not? I mean, it's
absolutely.
We all need authentic, hold us accountable, lift us up relationships. And sometimes those are harder to find. We could have a lot of friends, lots of followers, lots of people, but not that, it's really hard to find those, if you count them on one hand, you got them kind of people, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's why I love that example of Jesus, because I think that's so real for most of us, especially with social media. We now, we have thousands of friends on social media, but really how many of those people are really in your disciple 12 area where they know you personally? Mm-hmm. And then there's even fewer in that group that you would feel open and be able to just purely share everything that's going on in your life.
Yeah. So back to the kinds of rest. So you shared the two that are the most common. What are the sneaky ones that we don't really know we're struggling with, but they're nabbing at our ability to be productive and happy and all that? What are the ones we're not really paying attention to that we should?
The two that I think that I get the most emails on and comments about are sensory rest and creative rest. Sensory rest is the rest that's related to undoing some of the excessive sensory input our world has. So, unfortunately, most of us are on our computers for the better half of the day. If we're not on our computer, we're on our smartphones or gadgets. And, all of that is a sensory input. And then you add on bright lights, phones ringing. If you have kids, they're on your gaming machines. Yeah. And so lots and lots of sensory input. And many of us aren't really aware of how it affects us. I think most parents can notice it within their children. When you have a child who maybe is playing a lot of video games, you may notice that after they've done that for a few hours, they're a little bit more irritable than normal.
Yes.
Well, adults do the same thing after they've been on their computers too long. Most of them just think they're grouchy all the time, but they're actually exhibiting signs of sensory overload because of the excessive use of gadgets. And if people just are kind of to be aware of how do I feel when I first start, maybe in the morning doing my work if it's on the computer, versus now after spending a couple of hours doing my work, and then I'm going to do my social media for a few hours, and then I'm going to do this and watch TV. It's a lot of input. And if you start noticing that your attitude's getting worse, you may benefit by just having some quiet time, shutting the screens off, doing something that doesn't require a machine, and taking a break.
So sensory overload, the way to identify that is more by your attitude, your moods, you're frustrated, you're touchy kind of. That means it could be just because we're so used to everything just, there's this movement of activity all the time, and sometimes we just need to be able to stop it.
Absolutely. And the creative part that many people aren't aware of, creative rest has to do with allowing and creating and kind of making room in your life to be able to let beauty inspire and create something inside of you. So I think many people understand this better if they think about if you're someone who enjoys being around maybe bodies of water or the mountains or just out in nature. Or for some people, it's a man-made beauty. It could be going to a museum or listening to the symphony. But when you're someone who those types of beautiful and creative activities kind of awaken you and they inspire you, that's creative rest. And I think what some people think is that, well, creative rest means that I have to be a creative person, that I'm an artist or a writer or something like that. But really most of us are creative in ways we don't even realize. If you're having to be innovative, if you're a business owner and you're having to kind of come up with marketing ideas and think about what your customer would want. If you're a teacher and you're having to think up lesson plans, if you're a mom, homeschooling, there's so many ways that people have to be creative, and you're draining that level of yourself, that creative energy. You have to have an area to restore that. And that's what creative rest does.
Well, and that kind of gets into purpose a little bit. And I'm a big person that if I get outside, it just makes my world a better place. And because it does create, it ignites my creativity, because, you get outside, there's birds, there's critters, there's, God's handiwork is just magnificent. And it just reminds me that we were created by our Creator to be creative. And then sometimes we think, well, I'm not very creative, but we're gifted, right? So God puts us here for a purpose. And how do we tap into finding that individuality of ourselves in a world that is just saturated in comparison?
Well, I think for me, what really helped with that, I really went back to the very beginning, so to speak, kind of how it was set up in the beginning when God created man. So on the sixth day, man was created. On the seventh day, it talks about God resting. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing my research, I started thinking about what was man doing during this time when God was resting, because it doesn't talk about doing any work actually until chapter 2 of Genesis. Mm-hmm. And it dawned on me that the pattern God had set up for this process of work was that man was created, and then God kind of commissioned and spoke into man, helped him to see his identity and what his purpose on the earth was. And then that was immediately followed by this time of rest. Then the work happened. For me, I'd always talk about I needed to work to earn my rest, where the pattern in scripture is to work from a place of rest. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key for many people. When you allow yourself to kind of start with rest, what it does is it lets you have an opportunity to see what God has spoken into you. What is he commissioned and given you to do? What are your natural likes and dislikes? What is it that you are naturally gifted at? Mm-hmm. Where is it that you're seeing favor in your life that is unexplainable? Mm-hmm. Because I think oftentimes when God has spoken something into your identity, that portion of you speaks to the world through him without you having to do anything. Mm-hmm. So I've seen opportunities in my life that opened up that I can't logically explain why they've happened the way they've happened. And all I can say is, but God. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what rest does. It lets you get to that place in your life where you are quiet enough to hear what he's speaking over you.
That's really good. My favorite scripture is Psalm 91. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. So what about the parts that are on us to be disciplined enough? Because I write about on purpose. And to me, it's really just a very intentional way of living, being able to turn off your phone during your quiet time. Yeah. Or working out. And I know you'd like to talk about a healthy lifestyle and even fasting and things like that. How do we instill a sense of discipline to, if we feel just fragmented and we're everywhere, what are a couple of steps to taking back that restful position so that we don't feel, I think people just want to do everything all at once. Mm-hmm. But I like to say we break it down into small, doable chunks. So what are the practical things we can do to recover our life, which is part of your book?
I think the number one thing is just like you said, be very intentional. I think rest is a battle for most of us. Rest does not come easy. We make it sound like it should be something that we are just naturally gifted at doing, but most of us are much more gifted at staying busy than we are understanding how to slow down. And so it does take an intentional mindset that I'm going to purposely seek after rest. And then once that decision is made, I think it's important to really start looking at your own personal boundaries. The reason most people fail, if you can't, so to speak, at rest is because their personal boundaries have never been erected. So when they decide to rest, if someone happens to call during that time that you've set aside for maybe 10 minutes to just sit in the presence of God, you throw it, you just say, oh, well, I'll do it later, and later never comes. Or you decide that you're going to go for a prayer walk, a chance to kind of clear your mind and your thoughts and just kind of settle down. And then on that day, something happens. What I find is something is always available to do. There is never a lack of stuff to do. If you're deciding that you're going to have rest in a certain area, you have to prioritize it the same way you would a doctor's appointment or any other appointment that you would set with someone else and you would refuse to miss. You have to treat rest a very similar way. You have to make it a discipline, even though it's a discipline that's pouring back into you. It's not a discipline where you feel like you're punishing yourself. It's the discipline of rewarding yourself on purpose.
Yeah, and I think some of that we get mixed up in our heads because we want to go have lunch with people because we want those relationships that we talked about. But the key relationship with our Lord, with Jesus, with God, our Maker, has to be the go-to first. And that means we've got to get better at saying no.
Absolutely. Yes. I think that's one of what I call the gifts of rest. When someone starts really being intentional about getting the rest they need, spending time with God, spending time in prayer, I think what ends up happening for many people is they then start seeing that they don't have to do some of the people-pleasing behaviors they've been doing. And I think it's those people-pleasing behaviors that produce a lot of reluctant yeses when we should be giving a very truthful no. And in that truthful no, we allow ourselves to start setting some of those boundaries I talked about, because then you're not saying yes to something that really isn't God's assignment for you, but you just didn't want to hurt someone's feeling. You didn't want to have a confrontation. And honestly, boundaries naturally have to be confrontational. They have to. I mean, that's the nature of what a boundary is. And so I think it's important for people to understand that and to be comfortable with setting up those parameters around their life.
Yeah, and I was talking to a friend the other day, and she was really struggling with something. And I said, all you have to say is thank you, but no thank you. You don't have to go into 3 days worth of why I can't. If you're trying to scale back your busyness, which is so important, and I think especially as we're coming out of the pandemic and this season, it's a great time to reset. So you choose your best life now, and that's your website is choosing your best life. So if we're going to reset and say, okay, from today forward, I want to be choosing my best life now. What are those healthy habits that help us get back into that place where we're feeling peaceful?
Yeah, so I'll just give you 3 top ones I think that everybody should be actively working with. The first one is just to be very intentional about using your body. In other words, do something that doesn't feel like work to you. I think we get so in the mindset that I need to go run a marathon or I need to go do a 5K that then we don't do the simple stuff. Just go take a prayer walk. Take your dog out, go walk around your house if you're still not able to, go to your normal locations. Use your body. Find a way to stay physically active, because one of the big things that many people find is that their bodies get tense and tight when they're stressed. And so movement helps restore the muscle flexibility. It helps with your circulation. It's good for you. The second thing is to experiment. I think sometimes what happens with health is that we get into this same old. And it keeps us from being able to see the different possibilities, whether that's trying new foods, trying new exercises, allowing yourself to try new activities. I think it's important to always be allowing yourself to be on an adventure with God and to look at life as an adventure. There's so many different things to learn and to experience and to never get stagnant in life and enjoying life.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is to really start focusing on valuing time with others. You know, there's I as an internal medicine physician, I constantly get to see people when they're on their deathbed or when they're at the end of life. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone say, you know, oh, you know what, I wish I'd written that book, or I wish I'd done this or whatever related to work or career or goals. The number one thing that people talk about is, I wish I had another day with my child, or I wish I had another moment with my husband, or I wish I had another cup of coffee with that friend. So to make a point of allowing those relationships to be just as important, and honestly, even more so than those things that we can check off our to-do list or check off our goal list.
That's very, very well said. And so when you're in your doctor mode and you're doing internal medicine, so we're saying we should be intentional. The cost of not being intentional, what is stress doing to our body that we are allowing it to do?
For many people, what's happening with them is that they're just noticing that their health is not at its optimal. So some people are getting sick more than often. Their immune system's low. They're the people who are catching sinus infections every month, and they don't taking all these antibiotics and nothing's helping. Well, the issue is your immune system's low because you have a chronically high cortisol level from all the stress. Some people have chronic neck, back pain. So we have lots of people who are on narcotics or taking all kind of drugs to try to keep their pain levels under control that would really benefit from learning how to relax their muscles and improve their lymphatic system through proper restful techniques. Then we have high blood pressure, diabetes, heart attack, strokes, you know, all of those things that are related to high cortisol producing states that are all improved when the body gets back to more of a calm, restful type state. Did I just exhaust you?
Well, you know, there's so many things that, you know, you really want to do well in your life, and you want to love God well. You want to love others well. You want to take care of your body. You want to be in great relationships. And then, you know, all of a sudden a week has gone by, a month has gone by, you know, New Year's resolutions, I'm going to be so healthy. And then, you know, it really goes back to being very intentional and, as I like to say, on purpose. And we've got to take our lives back. And as you say, so how can people be in touch with you? How can people get your book? How can people learn more about what you've taught us? Because it's such valuable information. And I mean, I'm very health oriented, and I want to do all I can. So how can people keep in touch with you as we move forward?
Well, yes, the book is Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity. And you can learn more about it on my website at ichoosemybestlife.com. And at the very top of the website, there's a link to my rest quiz. And the rest quiz actually allows you to be able to determine which of these 7 types of rest that you are most deficient in. Yes, and I love it because so many people, when they do the quiz, they say, I knew something was making me tired all the time, but I couldn't figure out what. And I think it's very helpful to be able to narrow it down to the 1 or 2 types of rest that you are really deficient in, because those are the ones that are keeping you tired. And once you restore those types of rest, that's when you start feeling like really something's changed. You can tell there's been a shift.
Well, that's a great resource. So you can go fill that out, and then you can answer your own question about what is it that's making me so tired by your. Yeah, well, that's very good.
Self-diagnosed. I love it.
That's good. Well, so we will definitely I would love to talk to you again more later, and we're going to end our time today, but this has been very helpful. Thank you for sharing your expertise and, you know, your knowledge and the research that you've done, because, I mean, we're in a time of unrest, and you're teaching us to take back our rest, and that is something that we need to really take charge of doing. So thank you for reminding us of our part of that.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.